Not so good at coming back on time from lunch either. I'm calling, it's 1:08 and we are resuming our meeting. We got a handout before lunch that I had asked the commissioners to review, to be ready for questions. So I thought maybe we would start with a report from the executive director about the staffing and budget, which we requested from him last week. I also wanted to let the commission know that our staff, our limited staff, has been successful in scheduling the training that was requested. So we will have a presentation. We will have presentations on both Thursday and Friday afternoon, and I'll let Daniel tell you a little bit more about those. So, with that, you ready to go?
There we go. Yeah, thank you. First of all, to the training, if I could. We have a presentation tomorrow from Ditas Kataki, the former director of the census for the 2010, she did the 2010 outreach. Do you have, okay, everyone's got it?
Okay, that was so 8A on our revised agenda.
I was going to say it's 8 a.m. tomorrow morning.
No, it was number 8A on the revised agenda.
That presentation is tentatively scheduled for 2:30. I'll confirm that with her this afternoon. Ditas is very well known for having done an extraordinary amount of work with very little staff and very little funding. So it seemed to fit right into where we wanted to possibly head. And the second meeting will be on, or the second presentation will be by Karen McDonald of the Center for Governmental Studies in Berkeley, and she will be here at 2:30 on Friday. Tentatively again, because I'm confirming that with her. You can get her a little bit earlier. Well, I'm sorry. Yes, and we'll try for 2. I realize that there'll be a lot of questions for these 2, and they have a lot of information regarding outreach and also what you're going to be seeing insofar as the types of meetings that we'll have for the hearings. Any questions before I move on to the budget?
The first training is at what time? Microphone. When's the first training? Excuse me?
Ditas would be here at 2:30 on Thursday.
Okay.
And then Karen would be here. I actually misspoke. I asked her for 2 o'clock on Friday.
Okay.
And then as I know, if there are changes to that, I'll let you know. Okay. So we'll move on to the budget. What I handed out to you is what I had originally, if you look at the top page, and this has been, as I understand, posted. So to those of you watching, this would be the first page was my original proposal for staffing, and this a great deal of this proposal contemplated doing a lot of the work just within the staff. If you look on the second page, table 1, you're going to see the cost of this type of a staffing proposal, and when you look at the 1 month totals, so that we're not confused, each one of these staffing totals for each month is the actual salary plus the benefits, payroll costs, and gross monthly salary multiplier that's used. It's an estimate. It's 1.3%. So that's not to be confused with what was originally advertised at these positions. After looking at this and looking at the different types of staffing costs, I thought about it and went to a much more slimmed down approach. This is page 3, and this is now what I would like to propose to you. And it has some caveats that goes with it that we need to discuss. As you see, we've gone from lots of staff to just 7 people. And It would include the original 4 positions of myself, the legal counsel, the public information officer, and the admin assistant. I would propose to add on an additional AGPA position and the position that was approved for budget officer. What's missing from this proposal is a tech, kind of what we'll call a web tech, but our IT specialist. And the reason this is missing, if you would please go to page 4, the Secretary of State's office had just a very good idea, and that was that we should go ahead and contract for these services. And page 5 is actually the from their IT chief. This person proposed that we look at a 3/4 time position for the web administration and a half-time position for the desktop support. What this really does is it gives us a lot of support for the different types of technology that we're going to be using without stacking on the payroll cost of PERS and so forth, the benefits package. And will give us, I think, the support we need to maintain our website once we have our public information officer on board to kind of guide us through what he or she is going to need for that position to help maintain the website. So this is the scaled down version. On the page after that, you're going to see the statement of work for the desktop support analysts. You're also, the page after that, you'll see a statement of work for the web application program analysts. These are the people we're going to contract for. And then the back is just for any of the positions that you see listed. It will give you just a detailed description of what we intend generally, or what the state actually intends generally for a person in this classification to do. Now, everyone that I'm interviewing right now understands 2 things. They understand that this is an exempt position, so it doesn't actually lead on to state government, that we're only tying them to these types of descriptions so that we can hire them. They also understand that the most critical function, or the most critical thing in their description, will be the other duties as required, because they have to be very flexible in such a scaled down group. We're all going to be doing a lot of things that may not be in these descriptions, but so far everyone that I've interviewed has been very enthusiastic about joining us in this endeavor, and understanding that they're going to have to be flexible in their hours. What I would like to say also about scaling this down is it presumes that we're going to do more contracting. So it doesn't mean that we've necessarily cut out the difference between the estimate on page 2 of I believe, through September, $747,000 down to $470,000. So yes, we're going to see a $300,000 decrease in salary, and also that 30% that comes out into benefits. But that money is going to be eaten up very quickly in contracts that we're going to need for people who are going to provide us for professional services. Most specifically, we see the web tech, but we're also going to be putting that money into people who can specialize into certain areas insofar as getting us possibly securing us labor, or possibly securing us venues and so forth. So it's a savings on one hand, but we will see the expenditure in other services. But what I would like to propose, if this scaled down model is acceptable to you, is that then I come back to you on the 9th with a full budget of the proposed costs for not only our web technicians and our map drawers, but also after we have some presentations, some proposals for the people that we might want to, or the organizations that we might want to contract with in order to give us some other services, particularly in securing venues and in providing us professional services at those venues, people who have a great deal of experience in public outreach and working with the public. When we have that, because I believe that it will be the framework of a plan, the plan that we're all so anxious to have before we start, then we can take that to the legislature, and it will give them a very good idea of what we believe to do it as professionally as possible, with as few staff as possible, and with as much money dedicated to outreach as possible, that they should fund that, and most importantly, that at the very least release the budget augmentation that is in last year's budget, so that we can have that money available to us, the $1 million. So that's my proposal, and I entertain any comment.
Any questions? Commissioner Yao?
This is not a question, rather it's a comment. I personally appreciate your sensitivity to the Commission's fiscal conservativeness, and I do appreciate it because it shows clear effort, and I think it really, it's a good demonstration of how we are handling the money.
Okay, so Commissioner Yao had a comment as well.
Mr. Claypool, could you address the reliability of the staffing, not reliability of the staff, of the staffing? Which approach do you think you can get up to speed faster in terms of having an organization that can jump in and do the work that's necessary? In other words, the initial approach of 14 positions versus the 7 position plus outsourcing various activities.
Commissioner, I believe that the second approach is actually a much quicker approach. And as we started looking at the different positions, I'll give you an example. Right now, we're out looking for our budget officer. We finished the job description today. Under state rules, we're going to have to publish that for 7 days and give people the opportunity to apply, and then I'm going to have to interview them. So I will have that person's name for you by the February 9th meeting. If we start going out to all the rest of the staff people that we're talking about here, we've got at least that much work with us, or work to do to accomplish staffing out that full staff proposal. On the other hand, if we're more flexible and we enter into contracts with people who already have the staff available, then it really becomes their problem in providing us with the services that we need, and they already have the staff in place to do the things that we need to do. Now, let's just take the worst case scenario, that we don't get the appropriations we need. At that point, this is pretty much all the staff we could, the second plan is pretty much all the staff we could afford anyway, given that we would then have to start driving this entire operation using volunteer staff and anyone that we could get from say CSU Sacramento or UC Davis to assist us in this, as well as the different groups around Sacramento that have people who are available, possibly retired, that could assist us. So to answer your question, I believe the second approach is a more responsive approach. It will give us, it's going to put a lot of work on those 7 people, but then there would have been a lot of work for those 18 people. There's a lot of work in this no matter what. But if we go to contracting, I believe that you will end up with a caliber of staff and a caliber of outreach that you all believe is necessary for us to meet the intent of the initiative.
Thank you.
I like the idea of independent contractors. In the event along the way we feel that a consultant is not performing, then we can fire them immediately and find someone else. But we could not be able to do that if we had someone employed.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions or comments?
Just, Mr. Claypool, regarding the issue of legal counsel, you had a legal analyst in your previous scheme. So do you anticipate that we will be subcontracting out for additional legal services as it becomes necessary?
I am certain that our legal counsel will need some assistance. I won't say that at some point I wouldn't be back to say, well, we're not finding someone that's suitable to help them, but so we need an extra person. So I won't say that won't come up as a future, possible future budget item. The same way that if we get out and we look at the web technician contract and it's too expensive, I wouldn't come back and say, you know, we can probably, even with benefits, find somebody who can handle this better. So I would say that this is what I think we can get it done with, and that our legal counsel will or may have to use either existing staff in some of the work that they need, additional work they need, or we may have to go out and find someone who's willing to work with them, a volunteer outside, and provide their assistance to them to help them. I think those people are available. I really do. I think they're particularly to work with the caliber of attorneys that you are interviewing. I think that there are a great number of people who would take that and this process and think that it would be a great privilege to provide that type of assistance. I'm relying on that with this, but again, we would have to rely on that pretty much either way, unless the legislature decided to fund us fully for all that we wanted. And I think that we all know right now that the state isn't in that position. So I'm relying on that second path, and I think we can get it done that way.
All right, thank you.
Additional questions from commissioners who have not spoken? Commissioner Blanco?
Yeah, I have a question. When we get to the map drawing itself, with whatever software we choose to use, I guess I had been assuming that even though we're all going to be really, really proficient in that we will need that we would need support for that part of the process of map drawing, and both really and technical, you know. I don't. I'm a little worried that if we just rely on on the fact that, you know, we have people on the commission that are good at this stuff, that we all are interested in learning the program, that might not always work. That it's going to be complicated. Maybe I'm overstating the complication.
No, actually, Steve Lynn, who was the chair of the Arizona Redistricting Committee, strongly recommended that we never touch a line, and that we have consultants do it. So that's probable.
So that's not in this budget.
No, it's not. This is the budget you see in front of you is strictly a staffing budget for direct staff to the commission. Now, I'd like to explain a little further what I think I would be proposing to you on the 9th. Right now, we have Corinne McDonald coming to give us this presentation on Friday, and she's going to be explaining to you what the process is like, what you can expect. She might possibly have some suggestions on where you might go in your hearing process, so that will provide some clarification to us as to the direction we want to head. We will be putting, because we can't do the RFP process because it takes so long, we're going to have to reach out to people who are technically state employees, and that is UC Davis and CSU, the CSU systems. We can go on an interagency contract with them, and that cuts down the time that it's going to take to get their services dramatically, depending on the turnout or the turnaround from the regions or the president of the CSUs. So my plan is to do a short-term contract with Ms. McDonald and have her be available to you to help with the process of planning the outreach and how we should do it. Second part of my plan is to go to a long-term contract and have that same group provide the map drawing capabilities to us, and we'll have the ability to ask Ms. McDonald what what comes with those services when she has her presentation. But I think that, I believe that they were the same group that worked with the 2000 redistricting process and provided those services, and undoubtedly for the same reason. Government code requires that we use California state resources whenever we can, and as long as we have a resource to the caliber of the Center for Governmental Studies, it makes all the sense in the world to use them. So for a variety of reasons, that's the direction I think that we need to head as far as our contracts go. Beyond that, again, there are groups out there that have contacts up and down the state and have provided, as Ditas will explain tomorrow, have provided the venues and all of the tactical requirements to make a presentation, an outreach presentation to all the groups in California. They're seasoned. They know exactly how to have translators available. They know which groups need to be reached out to because they were the same group. That, at least one of the organizations was the same organization that reached out to the hard-to-reach communities. So this is the type of representation I think will get you the best outreach. And if we take it, if we pair it together, I think we'll have within our budget and along with staffing costs, we can keep it under the amount that's been allotted or close to it.
Thank you.
Commissioner DiGiulio?
I guess maybe just two questions. One, I'm assuming with all this contracting out, you'll be the one providing us with the options for the contractors, giving us a list for all these different positions that need to be contracted out, whether it be technology or
Yes, for the technology, actually the technology contract within this budget is significantly low enough so that I believe I could simply do it as a procurement. I'll have to check on that, but I don't, and I don't know that this is something that we need to wait for the commission to talk about. These are people who are just going to make sure that the website works, and that if your computer breaks down, you have somebody to call and say, you know, what's wrong. So this is what you see in this budget is going to be a fairly low dollar item.
Again, I guess one of my original concerns was one of the things I do see, as Commissioner Gary mentioned, a lot of those positions that were cut were kind of the supportive positions to the original staffing suggestions or just in general. And I guess my one concern with this would be that there's enough support there's enough staff to support the requests that are being made from the commission as well as the needs of the staff themselves, whether it be legal counsel or public information officer. I'm trusting that you've looked at this, but I like how we've really pared down and we're going to be utilizing contract services. But the one thing I see internally that might not be as easy to contract out would be the administrative support. And do you feel like you have enough with the one AGPA and the one administrative assistant to help you and Raul and the other staff as well as to handle all the requests that are coming from the commission?
It will directly depend on the path that we choose to take. If the path is to use some of these contractors who have this experience for the outreach, then I feel confident that we will have enough to do this. We may need to go out and advertise for volunteers and so forth to do some of the work within the office, but I think we can get it done. I'm not that concerned. If, however, we either can't use consultants or choose not to use consultants because of their expense, and we have to move to a model where we would have to schedule all the venues ourselves, and that's really what the original model. When I was asked to say how much would it cost and how many people do I need, I was taking it on more in the vacuum of if I just had to go out and do this myself, how many people do I think I would need? Since that time, I've had meetings with different organizations and different people who have given me a great deal of insight as to what is available out there in the way of organizations who can do this type of work and more importantly, organizations who are more than willing to assist us in getting our message out and so forth. And as I've seen those organizational structures out there, the ideas come into my head, and it's kind of rounding out that we can get that done.
And I guess I do like the idea of contracting out with an organization to do the outreach and the scheduling. It was more of the internal aspects. And I know from personal experience, I've used a lot of volunteers and things, and they are wonderful and great resources, but they are volunteers. And they're not being paid to be there. There can be much more flexibility, and because we're on a short deadline, I just wanted to make sure we have enough internal support that we aren't relying so heavily on volunteers that we'll get ourselves into a position where things won't, it'll become a lot of extra burden for staff and for the commission. That was just my concern. I just wanted to throw out there.
Well, I appreciate that. Between now and the 9th, and as I put together the budget that I would propose and the one that we take to the legislature, we're going to work with this level of staff. I assure you, if we're losing people or people are having to work around the clock, then I won't hesitate to come back and say I need more. But I'm really trying to move around the part about needing to staff up with a state position.
More questions or comments? I was also going to mention that Commissioner Blanco and I were going to put our heads together also to look at resources potentially from foundations. Many of them have fellow programs that might be able to give, fairly skilled, quote-unquote, volunteers, basically in kind, who might be able to assist at a much higher level for some length of time.
And all of that help is appreciated. So, and we'll take it all.
So, do we need to approve this or just indicate that we are happy with your Plan B?
I think just simply indicating you're happy with the Plan B and acknowledging that we're going to move forward to try to find a web tech to do what we'd originally scheduled for is sufficient?
Yeah, I mean, we approve those positions, you don't have to fill them, so.
Right, okay. And in the meantime, the one thing that I will need to do as far as staffing goes, by Friday, I'll know how I'm going to fill my positions within that second one, and I just need to get those approvals and bring them aboard as quickly as possible, with the exception of clearly the budget officer, and we'll be doing interviews for that.
Yeah, and so as we discussed this morning, we'll probably go into a closed session at some point today to at least discuss the public information officer, since you're ready to move on that, right?
Say again?
The public information officer you'd like us
Well,
to.
absolutely. I have the recommendation for that. And also, we're going to, at some point before we adjourn from this session, we're going to need to have the salary schedule approved as well.
Okay.
So, and I don't know that it has to be done right now, but we just have to have that so that we can go ahead and.
So this is a question for Mr. Rickards, because technically that wasn't added to the agenda until the 14th, thing on the salary schedules. Items 11, 12, and 13 were not added to the agenda until Friday the 14th.
So we can bring them back Friday. Yeah. Am I on?
No.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Okay, so that was the ED report on proposed staffing and budget under item 3. At this point, why don't we resume our discussion under, well, it started under item 9, but I think we were talking philosophically about the difference between commission business meetings and outreach meetings. So that could be under 9, it could be under 3. So why don't we go ahead and continue our discussion about that. I know that people had some ideas beyond February about whether we should be moving around the state for the business meetings or separating those out from the fact that we will definitely be moving around the state for the outreach meetings. Commissioner Ward? You have
Oh,
something?
sure, I'll start. Yeah, I think in my mind and from past professional experience, business is business and outreach is outreach. And I think it's important to, like I said, every time we meet, have a very defined, purpose for what we're gathering for. And in business meetings, obviously that's well agendized, and we have a tight schedule. With outreach, we're yet to kind of broach into that and make those same kind of plans. But to me, when we're talking about business, we're talking about needing to be in a place that connects us closely to all of our support, that connects us to all of the tools that we have, whether it be office space or low-cost rent and audiovisual support, things like that. And obviously, we've already agreed that our goal is 50 outreach locations. Certainly, that's a sufficient amount to be able to show that we're considering everyone in the state and that we're interested in everyone and anyone. And I just question as to what we gain by separating ourselves from kind of our the center of our spokes by moving this around to various locations.
Commissioner Yao?
Well, let me chime in at this point. In the outreach type of meeting, it's unlikely that we're going to be able to have majority of the commission present at most of the outreach meetings. As you mentioned, budget is a concern, and 50 meetings with moving 14 commissioners around to all the sites is probably beyond the budget that we have. And I truly believe that as a total commission, we need to be present before the people of the state. For example, down in San Diego, even when we're having meeting in the Inland Empire in city of Claremont, they're unlikely to drive 100 miles to come up to see the whole commission. And so I think the business meeting is really the only opportunity where we have the entire commission present at the same time. So for that reason, especially during the early phase of our project, we just need to be visible. And people see us more than just things that we say. They want to see how we interact with each other, how we try to get a sense as to how we think, how we act, so that they can behave accordingly in terms of how to get their input to us. And so by having business meeting in as many sites as possible, I think it'll give the public that opportunity to observe us better.
I like the idea of a balance between the two perspectives because I think they both have a lot of validity. Even though really the focus of our work, our product that we need to come out with are the maps, all the decisions that we're making during our business meetings will impact what the maps look like. They'll impact what the outreach process is, all the number of decisions that we're handling. And the fact that in recent meetings we've had, less than a handful, mostly nobody in the audience at our meetings, I think we want to err on the side of providing more opportunities for the public to comment and also balance that with the fiscal responsibility. So I believe someone put out the idea of perhaps alternating meetings. I don't know if we're having, say, 2 meetings a month, maybe we have one in a site that rotates around the state and have one in Sacramento or every 3rd meeting, but I'd like to put that out for other commissioners' feedback.
Commissioner Aguirre?
Sure. I certainly hear what Commissioner Ward is saying, but the way that I look at it, we're not only involved in awareness, but we're also involved in education. The hearing aspect of it, essentially, from what I understand, we're going to have the public that will come and share testimony with us, which we will not be able to discuss with them. We merely take their comments, they're logged in, and then we'll work with them later. Where it's a later aspect that I think we need to take back to the people of California. So by scheduling business meetings, then we are engaged in a community education process where individuals that are interested can really come and see how we're moving forth on this quote-unquote drawing of maps, understanding that as was just mentioned by our chair, we ourselves are not really going to, well, the recommendation is that we ourselves do not take pen in hand or stylus in hand to actually do the maps, but merely direct our consultant, as was just shared by Mr. Claypool, if we hire one, direct our consultant to look at the existing and based on our input then modify them in this way or that way to a design that is acceptable within Prop 11 and the Voting Rights Act, and also that listens to and considers the testimony that we hear from the public and our so-called communities of interest. So for me, if I can think about, my homeland in Ventura County, I think that there's great interest in what I'm doing up here in Sacramento. And I would say that that's the same for you all in your particular areas that we come from, understanding that we're not representing that one particular area. So for this commission, as was mentioned by Mr. Yao, as a full commission then presents itself in Ventura, from what I understand, we'll have a very good turnout, certainly a better turnout than we have in front of us right now. And we'll have a good turnout, and we will go through the process, even though it might get boring at times to an audience that's not part of the process itself, but we will do our work in a form that's accessible to the public. And then, after they see how we're doing our work, then when we actually roll out the maps, I think there will be a better understanding of how we got there. Absence that discussion, public discussion in front of those that are interested, then it's almost like a black box. We take the input, we go somewhere, we work it, and we come back and we present it. So there's I think, not as much engagement as we would have otherwise. So I like the suggestion of perhaps alternating meetings. My recommendation would be, given that we have about 6 months or so, maybe 5 months, that would if we agree on 2 business meetings a month, then at least once a month we're in San Diego, or one of those months we're in San Diego. Another month we're out in Riverside in the Imperial Valley, Coachella Valley area. Another month we are in the Central Valley. Another month we're up north. Another month we're in the Bay Area. Another month we're in the LA area. So I think that's the spirit of the proposition and the spirit of the work that we do, is that we don't act like a black box, that we be as accessible and as transparent as possible. So I like, and getting back to the outreach concept then, okay, we have a business meeting, let's say in San Diego. So that doesn't mean, as a full commission, that doesn't mean that if there's hearings scheduled that weekend or the following week, then those particular quote-unquote teams are going to leave that centralized point and going to distribute themselves to those areas where we have hearings throughout California, and then we will do that hearing, come back at the next meeting, share what we learned about Northern California, about the Central Valley, and in this case, perhaps we are in San Francisco. And then those folks around San Francisco will get to know what the concerns are in the northern part of California, what the concerns are other pieces of California. So we get more of an integrated whole in terms of information, and most importantly, being that my name is Tlamatini, which means one who facilitates the education of others, then we get that educational aspect to the process itself, which it's cool that we have the internet, but from where I come from, even though folks might have computers, they do not have the internet.
You know, I think, Commissioner Geary, that we can probably do the business, and I'm just throwing this out on the table here. We can probably do the business and the outreach together if we give it some pre-planning. But, you know, as an architect, I like to work on a schedule, so let me look at the months ahead of us.
That's right.
And there are really three key dates, I think. And let me work backwards. August 15th is when we need to submit the maps. We all agree with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we had discussions that we've got, as a commission, we've got to make the maps, we've got to put them together on a preliminary basis on June 1st. That's a draft map. Did we all agree with that?
Why don't you back up first? So August 15th, the maps have to be done. August 1st, they have to be posted.
Okay, so on August 1st, we have to post the maps.
Mhm.
Now, working back from there, or in between, where do we give the public a chance to respond to our draft maps? And that's a crucial issue. We need to get a response back to our first draft. If it's August 1st, that just gives us 2 weeks. Now, is that a reasonable approach in terms of outreaching to the public?
Well, I think to build on Commissioner Ontai, if we wanted to look, if you go backwards, if you say, I think in our earlier discussions, it was suggested that July 1st, if you say July 1st, that gives you 2 shots at posting a map and getting feedback with a 14-day notice. So that gives you 2 shots. If you want to have 4 shots, you back up to June 1st, so you can extrapolate out as to how many times we want to have our final map and then get feedback.
And so those are the alternatives, and maybe we should discuss that. How much time do we want to give the public? Enough time to respond to our first cut.
Commissioner Blanco, and then Commissioner Baraka.
So I'm really glad we have an architect. I have to follow court schedules, so I do the same thing. I work backwards from the date of the submission of my brief, you know? And then you really realize how much time you have to do all these things you want to do. So, and I don't want to get into the, so we have 6 months, less than 6 months. We have 6 months to do everything we're talking about. I don't want to get into the deadlines in between. But I want to make a couple of sort of philosophical points about this. I think it's more important for the entire commission to be at all the regions than it is to have business meetings at different places. Okay? I do. I think that that's where it's important to have the presence of the full commissioner so that those people see that this is truly a cross-section commission and they feel comfortable that whoever's taking, that it's not 3 people taking back the word to this larger body. So I see it completely differently. I see that that's where we go as a full body. And I'm looking at the business agenda that's our standing business agenda. And I'm hoping that a lot of this business agenda isn't going to be a standing agenda, that a lot of it is front-loaded with details. And that what our business meetings will become more and more about will be the maps. The drawing of the maps with our consultants. So I don't see a lot of business meetings, hopefully. I mean, if they're business, it's the business of redistricting. And I'm not saying that can't happen anywhere, but that might actually impose some limitations. If the business meetings are business where we're, you know, actually having our map drawer help us do this stuff. So those are my, I don't want to get, I'm also thinking about the deadlines, but I just wanted to say philosophically, I almost see it completely the inverse.
Yeah, and I agree. I think a lot of the business things that we're talking about are really setting up shop.
Startup items.
Yeah, and that's going to be done, I think, in another week or two. hiring the
I'm trying
staff.
hard.
Yeah. And then the rest of our time should be devoted to the legal issues of communities of interest, listening to experts, to get us into the real business of why we were created.
Commissioner Baraba.
I think there's another deadline we have to be really sensitive to, and that's submitting to the Department of Justice, and I think that's in July.
That's a key date.
That's right.
Right, right.
Commissioner Ward.
Yeah, I just appreciated all the comments here. I think it's been really clarifying for me on both ends. I think in my mind, after hearing all of that, what it just comes down to is, again, I believe it or not, I boil it back down to my first statements. Business is business, and outreach is outreach, and I want to do as much outreach just like y'all. I think that really needs to be our focus. And as the business of the commission changes over the next few weeks, from setting up and the intricacies of running a commission to literally the task at hand and the maps and the process of redistricting, I think we're going to see we already know the business meetings are actually going to cut down. We're talking about every other week, so that's going to limit how much time is available for us to actually work a lot of issues. But also, I think it's become more intense and more time intensive. So to me, when in understanding what Commissioner Aguirre was having to say, I agree with every bit of it. Education, outreach, awareness, all those things are key to being successful and are what the public expect. But I think that all falls under outreach. And if we can centralize, follow kind of a new model and leverage technology by being, kind of in a central location, leverage technology, provide the same access, if not more, by being here than being on the road. All the things you mentioned about feedback and people having an interest in wanting to see, they have that now. And I don't think that moving the business meeting that is not designed to necessarily take testimony, but to conduct the business of the commission, I don't see an advantage to doing that other than, like Commissioner Blanco said, possibly limiting consultant access and access to other experts. But following kind of what the public expects as well, a more efficient and streamlined model of meeting in a location, kind of like we are presently and we have been following, that's central, connected, and leveraging technology and government resources. Unfortunately, Sacramento is the ideal place to do that. And it also allows for efficiency of business. So I just think that's something to keep in mind, whereas all the other goals and concerns that we stated, I think, are not only met, but again, allow us to focus on outreach and put more resources by saving money and saving resources that we can put towards, again, the arena of outreach and education.
Commissioner Forbes?
Yeah, it seems to me that, the comment was made earlier that I'm hoping that the more mundane part of our business work is close to being done, and I think that is properly done in Sacramento. However, as Commissioner Blanco suggested, I think, is that as we get further down the road, many of our meetings, our business meetings, will indeed be discussions about the maps. And it strikes me that those discussions could be most beneficially done in the field. So if we're talking about or getting, testimony regarding, or put together regarding Southern California districts, that if we have our business meeting in Southern California, that behooves us to do that. And same, likewise, if we're looking at Bay Area maps. It behooves us to have our business meeting in the Bay Area, so people who are directly affected by what we're doing that meeting will have an opportunity to speak to us at that meeting. And so I would, when we have general business meetings like we're having today, I think Sacramento is fine. But I think once we start, where the maps will become a major part of the agenda, I think we should be, if we could work it, we should be meeting where those maps are.
Commissioner Blanco?
We're not going to be doing San Diego maps and LA maps and San Francisco maps and Fresno maps. It's not the way it's not the way it works, I don't think. We will be working on maps and looking at how everything affects everything. We're not going to sit down and say, we're going to look at congressional districts, whatever, or assembly district, this and this, which covers Southern California. I haven't done this before, but I have done parts of this before, and I've never seen a conversation that's about a particular geographical area's map. It's about, okay, now we've got this new data, and we've seen the population growth here. If we do this here, how's this, the domino effect here, but we have to, think about the contiguity, and this would be helpful to hear about from our consultants.
Right.
Because if it is that, as you say, then I can see trying to meld the two things together. I would agree with you that that's a perfect marriage of trying to do both, be in the public and be addressing their business, in that community. But I don't think that's the way it's going to play out. So that's something for us to really ask our experts if that's really the way it works.
Commissioner Yao, and then Commissioner Antai.
I think the term business meeting is what's throwing us off. I think you're all right. Beyond this week, hopefully, by the time we get down to the Southland, we'll be finished with this organization setup type of meeting. So the two type of meeting we basically have is a small subgroup that are doing the outreach the way we have previously defined it in terms of the 50 meetings that we have throughout the state, and the meetings where the entire commission is present. Those are the two distinctions, and it is very likely that we're going to be, well, obviously in the outreach meeting we're trying to collect input, whereas in the combined meeting we're going to be discussing policies and philosophies and approaches and making those type of decisions. So maybe we shouldn't really worry about trying to distinguish between the two type of meetings, and just make it a policy that if we can possibly get out into the community, we should do so. Now, the reason, cost has been brought up as an issue. I don't think cost is really an issue, because at least if it's in Northern California, the Southern California group has to fly an airplane and get up here, and if it's Southern California, it's vice versa. If it's in the middle of the state, it may be cheapest that way, because most of us probably would drive and get there and be less hassle. But outside of that consideration, especially if we're able to get most of the cost covered by the host of these meetings, the differences is going to be very marginal. And as such, maybe what we should shoot for is just do it when it's available, convenient, and with the philosophy as much as possible. If we can't make it for whatever reason, last minute fallouts, things of this nature, we'll just default back to a location that's readily available to us, and don't try to go beyond that.
Commissioner Antai?
I would go back and have all of us think about working backwards in terms of key benchmark dates. And until we've gotten that time skeleton, all of this discussion is good, but it has there's no structure to it in terms of when those benchmarks are. We have the Department of Justice review. How much time will that take? And that's going to be part of that time structure. So I think the only thing that's posted on the website right now, the maps are due August 15th, and there's nothing in between. And I think it behooves this commission to start putting some structure to that so that the public knows what to expect.
Right, setting some milestones.
Yep.
So did you want to, Commissioner Ante, I'd like you to continue, so we got to July 1st and then June 1st. Did you want to propose some other points?
And yeah, these are just ideas, so please step in, anyone. When would we be submitting something to the Justice Department? When would that occur?
I don't know the specific date, but as I recall, it was sometime in July. It had to be submitted.
And do we know how long that'll take?
That is an unanswerable question, everything I've heard so far. But I think we could ask that question of Corinne McDonald, because she's very familiar with it, on Friday.
Yeah, we could, we're going to have an expert here on Friday who will probably be able to answer a lot of these questions and maybe inform our schedule a little more. To some degree, we're guessing a little bit, which is...
Okay, so that's a key question that let's all mentally keep track of. Then moving beyond that or up from that point on, it would appear to me that March, April, May, June, we've got 4 months to do public outreach. And we've talked about 50 venues distributed over the state of California. The subcommittee either will suggest to us how that's going to be done, combining business by way, I think it's semantics about what we mean by business versus setting up shop versus legal issues. But I think all of that can be part of outreach as well. So there's really 2 tiers here on all of our meetings. Question would be how many members of the commission have to be there, whether it's 2 at a minimum or 8 at a minimum. So
Yeah,
we've
actually
got 4 months to outreach, and that's what we have. That's our window.
4 weeks to do, 4 months to do outreach, and also probably do some of that map drawing as well during that time. I don't think we can stop
That's
that.
right.
Commissioner Yao?
Let's look at the timeline from a different direction. We know we're going to get the date. We know we're going to get the data on April 1st, on March 30th, April 1st. And the question that we posed to the Arizona speaker that was here was where's the midpoint of the process? And he clearly identified that the midpoint would be when we release the draft map, the first cut of the map. So starting with April 1st, it appears that we probably need to have a draft map released by June 1st, let's say, at the latest. So in order to get all the public outreach input into that draft map, because you don't want to be drawing maps and then modifying it simultaneously, you probably should have all the inputs available not much later than April, first part in April. So to think that we can go into June to finish the outreach, we're probably going to have a very tough process of drawing the map and modifying it simultaneously. So when I talk about having meeting every day in the last meeting, I probably am completing the outreach program in the month of March, April, and probably not too much beyond that, okay? And so the 50 meeting, on one hand, appears to be on the low side, but that's almost like, one meeting every work day type of scenario. So looking at it from that perspective, I think our outreach activity is much more compressed than the data you offer up by going at it from the other direction.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I think you're right. And just, that means basically in March and April, we need to do about 6 outreach meetings a week.
And keep in mind, this is the accepting public testimony
Right,
part.
right.
And we talked about splitting up into groups of 3.
Right, so that still means.
So we wouldn't
still-
all have to do them all, but it's possible we will have one of these meetings every day, those
Yeah,
couple
but
months.
we'd also talked about, I mean, to make them accessible, they may need to be more on the weekends or at night.
Right.
So our actual days that would be most effective to do them are really, not many.
Right.
And most of our Saturdays in the month, March and April should probably be,
They're gone.
Yeah,
gone.
they're gone. Although Commissioner DiGiulio had made a good point that for different segments of the population, during the day is better. So I think the key thing is to vary them.
Cynthia. Yeah, and the one thing to keep in mind is that you've got to do outreach before and after you release a map.
Right. So
So
there's
the
2
outreach
parts.
has to, I mean, it doesn't say equal parts or anything like that, but just keep in mind that you have to do outreach after you release maps.
Can we spend a minute and just discuss that particular point? Because I believe Commissioner Forbes proposed after we release the map, we take a
regional
different
meetings.
process to do, quote unquote, the outreach or post-map release outreach. That's not the same as the pre-release outreach.
Commissioner Forbes, you want to refresh our memories?
Yes, what I had thought we would be able to do would be, we would have, before we do the maps, we would have all the 50 outreach meetings we're talking about, and perhaps one set of regional meetings where people would have one more opportunity to talk to us before we put pen to map, so to speak. And then we could have as many as, perhaps 6 regional meetings on 1 or 2 versions of the maps as we reacted to public comment. But the concept was to go to regional meetings for the first initial set, because it would be, I think, impractical to have us have 50 meetings each time we did this. So that was the idea. We'd have to set it, we'd have 1 or 2 or even 3 sets of regional meetings
Okay,
at
so
different
since-
points in the process.
So just to repeat that, since Commissioner Forbes' microphone went out for a second there, the process that Commissioner Forbes was suggesting is the post-map release feedback meetings would actually be by region. And were you also suggesting that this would then be, of course, the full commission?
That's correct. That was my concept.
Okay. Commissioner Blanco?
Could we take, I'd like to see this charted out. Even right now. I think this is really hard to do without like a big map and dates and deadlines. I don't know if everybody else feels that. I just think, I would almost say, could we take like some 10 minutes time out and go get something that we can flip and look at, or, I'm serious, because it's a little difficult
Yes.
just verbally.
Without visual aids.
I
Can we
totally
do
agree.
that?
We certainly can. Commissioner Barava has a comment?
I'm not sure you all have it, but several meetings ago, I handed out a little flow chart, and we can maybe get copies of that and it's been submitted to the public, so it would not be a new document. It's a highly generalized, pretty much what we've just been discussing, and what we could do is we could use that to start putting some dates on it.
Yeah.
And then, as soon as we get that done, we're going to realize there's some other boxes in between. And and that would be a way of getting this conversation started in a kind of a formal way that would allow us to have something tangible rather than jumping from one idea to the other.
So this was a document entitled Initial Thoughts on Process Flow?
And another point I want to make is that on the question of how long will the pre-clearance take, the Section 5 pre-clearance, I wish Karen could tell you that.
Yeah.
But well, nobody knows, but also Karen really is she's not a lawyer.
Right.
And she hasn't done pre-clearance. She will tell you that's not what she knows. She knows maps, she knows, but she won't be able to answer that question.
Can you?
Justin will not, this is a question that the people who litigate Section 5 know. I mean, and it varies, because it varies on who's in office politically. It varies on what district the map comes from. You know, a lot of political factors, frankly.
Sure.
And then there's some practical factors about about what the submission looks like and what you're really asking to do and how big the change is. And so there are really in the country a handful of practitioners that not only within voting rights, but within voting rights do a lot of Section 5 pre-clearance work. And I think that when we get our general counsel on board, one of the first things we have to do is sort this out. But I just want to say that I don't expect Karen to be able to answer this for us. She really can't. That we do have people. I mean, I know people. I know of the handful. I know like 4 of them. But I worry about proposing them because they're all people that come from civil rights organizations, and they might be perceived as having a particular point of view. But you know, Nina Perales in Texas has done maybe 30 or 40 pre-clearances, you know. Joaquin Avila did the Supreme Court case that was about a Section 5 in Monterey County about whether judges had to be voted on, et cetera. So there are some real experts, we have them close, and they would be willing to do this, but I personally don't want to recommend them just because it feels too close to people I know and I've worked with.
I think we can wait for our chief counsel,
So
who
I think the chief
hopefully will be
counsel
hired
could-
very soon.
Yeah.
To advise us on that.
Yeah.
Could I just suggest, I'm looking at what I've written down, and this initial discussion has started with business meetings versus outreach meetings.
Yes, it
And
did.
I think I would love to see a flow chart, but maybe before we break to do that, if I could maybe bring it back to that and I kind of merge a little bit of what I had heard. I'd like to suggest maybe that we revisit exactly how we're how many times we're going to go out into the community to do business meetings. I think that after we do Claremont in the beginning of February and back here in Sacramento, we will have a better idea of what business we have left. As Commissioner Blanco said, I think maybe by that point, February will be a goal of ours is to get a lot of this startup done. And then we will also have, hopefully, people on staff that can give us an idea of what our outreach meetings are going to look like. And we will also have a better idea, hopefully, of what will be required of us when we start doing the maps. So I'd like to maybe suggest that if we want to continue this discussion, but knowing that probably towards the end of February, we'll have a better idea of whether or not we need to really have this discussion of business meetings versus outreach meetings. I think some of it will be determined for us based on what we accomplish in February and what our consultants tell us.
I think that's a good point, and I think people have thrown out a lot of good points, and we clearly don't have the information to make this decision right now, and we don't have to make this decision right now. Although I will recall that Commissioner DeGiulio is the one who put the March schedule on the agenda. It might be that our March schedule is 100% outreach meetings, and that we don't need a full commission business meeting, you know, during the month of March, because we're just trying to get as many of these outreach meetings done as possible, and then we may not have to have another one of these meetings until April 1st when we get the census data.
And one last thing, I do think it does help us to understand that it might not be bad to touch base in Sacramento, because a lot of our staff, and I would imagine our consultants will probably be in this area as well too. So if we do have a traditional business meeting, maybe as Commissioner Galamos-Malloy mentioned, is at least touching base every certain amount of time, just for the sake of making sure we're in contact with staff and our consultants.
So with that point made, which I think is a very valid one, is the rest of the commission okay with kind of deferring a decision on this? I mean, I think we have a plan, a game plan for February. We have, you know, experts coming in starting this week, and many more after that I think will inform a decision about this. And maybe we can move to Mr. Antai's suggestion of actually looking at the phases and milestones and starting to look at what our overall schedule might look like.
That would make sense. I also think that we need to further define what outreach means. It's a little confusing to me. I can see 3 levels of outreach coming out of this. One level is just all of us or combination of us reaching out to groups and individual leaders within our respective areas, educating people on what is apportionment, what is redistricting, what is the process, who we are, information items. That's one level of outreach. Another level of outreach is going to come later, and it's going to be more serious. We want your input on what you think the map should be. That's a public hearing process. Maybe that's more of a collective regional level of outreach. And then the third part will be sharing what we've come up with a map and getting public response to it. And that's, again, it could be on a regional level, but I see 3 levels of outreach, and perhaps we should discuss that later on.
Yeah, actually, we did discuss this a couple of weeks ago. We talked about the first phase, the first part you mentioned is education, and the second one as input, and the third as, feedback. So I think that's consistent with what we've talked about.
Which is good. I think we did talk about that, but to the viewing public, I think they have to be reminded of what that means.
I think that's a good point, and we can label our phases appropriately. Commissioner Bravo.
It seems to me on the initial part of that outreach, which is the education, there's a lot of organizations out there already undertaking that activity, and rather than our using resources, we should take full advantage of those, including, I think, there was some material recently gathered that gives an indication of the extent to which these organizations are capable of handling that outreach.
As a matter of fact, I'm passing out some information right now from one of those organizations that would qualify as education. Yeah, so certainly we will not be alone in the education phase of this, and we absolutely should leverage all the other resources that are dedicated to this.
May I make a comment on this brochure? Yesterday, a group called the Common Cause held a redistricting conference in Los Angeles. Commissioner Rayer, Commissioner Pavereau, and myself were there to make introductory remarks. Jeannie and Andre made the opening remark, and I was there at noon hour to make the luncheon remark. And we did not stay for the conference. In attending that conference, they had they prepare a lot of handouts, and this is one such handout. This basically is funded by the James Irvine Foundation, and it's a booklet that's teaching people how they can get involved with the redistricting process, and try to have some using layman's language to explain as to what redistricting is about and how to get inputs to this commission as well as to get inputs onto the website. So this is I'm not trying to endorse the organization or endorse the brochure, so this is what I brought back from that event as some of the material that are available by a lot of groups that are overseeing this particular effort.
To complement that notion, if you turn to page 14 and 15 of this, there are 6, 7, and 13 organizations who are involved in this activity that we should take full advantage of.
Yes, and this printing of this brochure was also funded by the Irvine Foundation, who also funded the 6 redistricting centers that are open to the public.
I would just note, I think all of the commissioners received a letter directly from the James Irvine Foundation that lays out a little more detail on what they're funding and who all these partners are.
I think we'll have a lot of partners, and I guess the question, and I think the question for me is, when we're sort of thinking, can we piggyback or not reinvent the wheel? Because a lot of these groups will actually be going out into communities and taking testimony. But I think us taking testimony is different than them taking testimony. I wish it could work more smoothly because it would be more efficient. But I think unless we could figure out a way where the meeting itself makes a distinction between when they're addressing the commission officially and when they're addressing these these other organizations because they want them to go advocate on their behalf. I mean, I think I know there's a lot of people doing this, and I know they're going to hold hearings, and they're going to go out there and get input from people about what people want in their maps. I don't know really how we work in tandem with them because of this thing where I think, need to take official testimony.
Do we need to work in tandem with, I'm sorry.
I was just suggesting this for the outreach, the education part of it,
Mm-hmm.
not the outreach is good.
Right.
Yeah, no one's
Right,
trying to.
specifically,
I see.
I'm just thinking of the
I see. I
education
misunderstood.
component of it,
Yeah.
yes.
So again, there's
misunderstood.
three different types, and the education part, I mean, absolutely, we should leverage these resources, and in keeping with that, the brochure that we've been handing around can be found at www.redistrictingca.org, and it is called California's New Redistricting Commission, and so you can order your copy there.
And I do think it does behoove us to at least know what they're doing and where they're going, so we're not, double dipping in the same places all the time and wearing people out. So I'm sure the staff will be able to coordinate that fine, but I do think that beyond the educational aspects they can provide, we also need to coordinate logistics to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, certainly these groups are almost certainly going to want to testify in front of the commission.
Right.
Maria, Commissioner Blanca, I think is a case in point where probably the public is confused on what is outreach?
Mm-hmm.
Who's doing, when is it educational? When is it the proper time when they want us to hear their input? And when is it the proper time for us to allow them to respond to our maps? So I think we're going to have to package these outreach and label them so that we ourselves are not confused.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Can somebody remind me if we have the obligation to do the educational outreach meetings statutorily?
We don't have an obligation, although I suspect most of us feel that's an important part of our charter.
Okay, I just wanted to know that.
Our obligation is to draw the maps and to do
Our
it
obligation,
publicly.
I'm inclined to, there are people all over this in terms of educating people about what redistricting is and how they should, and that it's important to have participation. And given what we're about to do when we're going to work backwards with the timeline, I know I may seem the last person in the world that would be saying this because my background is sort of in communities, but I don't think that is our key, given the time limitations, I don't think that's our key function. I think we do have to be extremely careful about hearing people out about what they want and then going back with our maps. And I think those are our two key functions and not the educational component. I think we should establish good relationships with the people doing the components, the educational part of this, and maybe figure out if we want to go on the road with them sometimes and have them meet a commissioner, and that kind of thing. So that, we're present and, but I don't think that's our major function. And given our time limitations, I don't think we have the time to do it. I think we can I think we should look at these folks as our partners and figure out how to do that without ourselves doing it. Second of all, I looked up the stuff on Section 5, and I think we're in luck. It can't take more than 60 days for them, for an administrative review, which is what we would be talking about. We wouldn't have to go to the 3-judge federal District of Columbia Court. It can't be any more than 60 days, and then if it says if the implementation has to occur before the end of the 60 days, you do an expedited review explaining why, and those are routinely granted. So just to kind of put our mind at ease that, I mean, that would be true for us, it'd be expedited, and,
Yeah.
So I think.
We're okay.
And I take back everything I said about it's unknowable and it's highly political, and it is, but I think there is that 60-day cutoff date.
Requirement.
And they have to start that when they have something to pre-clear,
Right.
which presumes that we have a map for them to pre-clear. So the other thing I just wanted to ask, or maybe, do you want at some point in the future to hear from the California AG who did the past pre-clearance for the state?
Yeah, that'd be great.
And expects, I had initial contacts with them. They're willing and able, and in fact, and expect to be doing the pre-clearance. You obviously have some choices about that, and you have the lawyers who practice in this area who either could do that with the AG's permission or with your help as a consultant or something like that. But so what I just proposed to do, I just wanted to interrupt for a minute, if you excuse me, is stick that on the agenda, and we can. I'm thinking, listening to you, that, and of course the new council will be taking this over, but my notion is there'll be a number of items that will be on the agenda all the time, which will give you the flexibility to do some business if it comes up, and which will not, you don't have to take up an item that's on the agenda, and you don't have to not do outreach because you have business items on the agenda. So what we'll try and do is make sure we've got the standard items to give you the flexibility to deal with these things as they come up.
Great.
And as to the education thing, I was looking at the statute, and it doesn't talk about education per se. It's outreach. That's not to say that you're precluded from doing it. That's your choice. But statutorily, you are to get public input on the redistricting process. That's your mandate.
Thank you for that clarification. It is now 2:30. It's time for a bio break. I wanted to point out that the process flow diagram that Commissioner Baraba had put before us is available on the website under meeting handouts, and I suggest that we take advantage of this time to find that, since there is no way for us to project it, but members of the public can find it on our website under meeting handouts. And do we know what it's called?
It's on the homepage. It's on the homepage of the We Draw the Line site. If you go to the right-hand side, you go down and it says View Meeting Handouts just above upcoming events. And then if you click on it, it will be
Aha.
in this group of handouts.
And it's called Process Flow, January 13th, 2011. Let's really try again for a 10-minute break and be back here at 20 of. Okay, thank you.